organizing. Usually when I talk to groups, it's about immigration, whether it's on the Hill talking to legislative staff or out in the country talking to activists. But today we're going to talk about organizing, and this is really important because how many of you are familiar with a fellow by the name of Jacob Coxey? Coxey. Okay, I became familiar with him when a friend of mine would use this phrase, wow, there's enough food here for Coxey's army. No idea what he was alluding to. But Jacob Coxey, his family business was, he had a quarry, had a passion for racehorses, and he was also very interested in economics and politics and basically the social good. And in 1993, the Great Panic started. It was the greatest depression in the country up until the Great Depression of the 20th century. And in 1894, well, in that same year, actually 1893, Jacob had run into a guy named Carl Brown. Carl was something, he was that century's version of an economist, and he was something between a P.T. Barnum and a Wild Bill Hickok in how he presented himself to the world. And they came up with this notion that, you know, with so many people unemployed, and there being no social safety net at the time, no safety net at the time, wouldn't it be great if the government, it needs infrastructure, why not create a works program, put all these people to work, and when the economy gets righted again, well, everyone goes back into private industry. And this wasn't a popular notion at the time because there were things called the moral peril of charity and giving people work and them not having to actually do productive work. And Jacob actually organized, well, that was kind of what they wanted to do. You know, being enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives and Congress assembled the Secretary of the Treasury of the United States, basically authorizing money for this works program. And it would be known as the General County Road Fund System of the United States. Okay, so I'll go back. Now, it doesn't surprise me that no one knows who Jacob Coxey is, because what he did, he pulled off an amazing, in fact, I'll go back one, they even had songs about his march. So from Ohio, he left Ohio with 100 guys, went through the Cumberland, down through the Cumberland Gap, and eventually ends up in Washington, D.C. It's a protest march to bring attention to what he wants to do. Well, this catches on. This is as close to coming viral in the 19th century as you're going to get. I mean, imagine this. People are unemployed all over the country, in Montana, in San Francisco, in Idaho, in Georgia. So what happens is this. People start, like literally in Montana, they hijack a train and they're making their way to Washington, D.C. This is happening all over the country. This is, I mean, the reporters are loving it. I mean, again, this Carl Brown character, again, he looks like Wild Bill Hickok. There is this fellow who's part of this group. He's known as the mysterious stranger. He has impeccable military bearing. He's a great equestrian. I mean, this thing is just made for the press. Unfortunately, by the time they get to D.C., the other groups have kind of fallen off and made it later. Coxey gets there. He's pretty much arrested on the grounds of the Capitol. And of course, nothing happens. Now, the nice thing is, well, I guess the silver lining is, the whole concept of what he was trying to do with the roads program really became the Works Progress Administration under the FDR's administration. But the thing is, I bring this up because, yes, this ghost, was able to make its way into policy, but he had no organization really to continue on form. So that's what I'd like to really talk about tonight, is how to build an organization. And I themed this talk about, I call it populism from Perot to Trump, and how to harness what we've been doing in these movements. Because, as I mentioned, Coxey was 1894, Ross Perot, 100 years later, 1992, and then you fast forward to President Trump today, 2016. And all these guys had an enormous groundswell of grassroots support. At the 20th reunion of Ross Perot's 1992 campaign, we got together in Dallas, a bunch of us who had worked as staff and as volunteers, and we were watching the videos, and I was blown away with the amazing amount of support at the grassroots level. I mean, there were movies from Detroit, from Ann Arbor, Michigan, from Philadelphia, from Los Angeles, San Francisco. I mean, Perot had become an icon and had a huge populist movement behind him. Now let me go back one more. But the movement ended up just kind of, it became United We Stand America, and then Perot tried to create the Reform Party, run as an outside candidate. That didn't work, that kind of fell apart. Happy to talk about that in the Q&A if you want to learn more. It kind of, that, much like Coxey, fell apart. Now, President Trump was a little bit different in that he understood that a third party isn't going to work here in the United States. We're simply not designed for it. So his job was to take over the Republican Party. And in the primary, I mean, he cut through 12 primary candidates like a hot knife through butter. I mean, it was amazing. And back in 2024, he basically created an engine that was able to get him back into office within the party. I mean, the whole America First movement it is not your father's Republican Party by any stretch of the imagination. And it's an amazing thing to see. And a lot of what I would call America First candidates have been put into office, not just at the federal level, but down at the state level, county level, municipal level. And that is a job that's going to continue. And that's why organizing at the grassroots and organizing effectively is so important for the health and the future, what I would call the future prosperity of the country. So let's talk about organizing. And tonight I'm going to talk about how I've organized my the Institute for Sound Public Policy based on what I've learned. You can kind of, there's things you'll probably take from it and say, yeah, this is great. Other things just may not be applicable, but I'm going to put it all out there in the hopes that, it'll be a great discussion and everything is an opportunity to learn. Okay. So, when I talk to people about starting an organization, the first thing I say you don't do is start with a lawyer.
Joe!
If you need a structure, when I was in California, right, my organization, Democracy for America, Pasadena, we registered with the Fair Elections Commission and everything, and we had went through the paperwork, but we didn't need a lawyer for that. Also, lawyers can be really expensive. I did a small video with my best friend, Steve Lamb, because we were sitting in the coffee shop once, and this young guy is like, oh God, I just spent all this money on the lawyer because I want to start a nonprofit and help people and help the poor. And my friend says, well, let me ask you something. How many people did you feed yesterday or today? Well, he said, well, none, I'm just getting started. He goes, well, let me tell you my story. So we started a mission in Hollywood, and they would mission to prostitutes, homeless, and once a week they would go and they would go to the supermarkets and get all the fixings for sandwiches, put them together, distribute them, and eventually this grew into quite an organization, all run by volunteers. Eventually they hired a director for it. He wasn't well paid, but they really did some great ministering there in Hollywood. They had a homeless shelter that they were running. They had great relationships with police and other services so that when people needed help, they could get them to the right places. And they were feeding people, which was amazing. And all on a budget of like $40,000 a year at the end of it. And they were doing all of this long before they actually created a 501c3. Now, sadly, one day the executive director, he really needed to move on. And a large nonprofit purchased them. And unfortunately, the nonprofit pretty much shut down all their operations. However, if you look at all their nice shiny brochures and everything, you would think that they were still working there, doing their mission in Hollywood, but they weren't. That's the nonprofit work. So again, don't start with an attorney. There's plenty do-it-yourself options. You can go online, find the forms, all there. Now, eventually, if you start taking in large sums of money, you need to hire people, then yes, you will need to start a more formalized organization. But always start with a mission statement. This is really important because you need these shared values, aspirations, and goals. When I started Pasadena Democracy for America, I had started with a small group up in Altadena, a town that you probably heard of recently. They got hit by the fires. And we had a visioning meeting one night where we literally just put everything out there. No holds barred. What do we want to do? What do we want to accomplish? And we basically created a mission statement based on all of that. And when you do get going, this organization is amazing. They're out of Indiana. They're called Charitable Allies. And when we had to do a name change on our 501c3, so there's a lot of paperwork that goes to that between the IRS, Washington, D.C., where we're headquartered. These guys did it all. And they did it, I think, for under $1,000. So find these guys if you need help administratively. Also with attorneys are very good too. So how did I structure my organization that exists today? We're really based on, it's a three-legged stool. One is policy, one is activism, and the other is litigation, because sometimes you just got to drive them to the courthouse door to get anything done. And I'll go into each of those now. Policy, thanks Dave for bringing one of these by. This is one of our policy manuals. As I mentioned, we do employment. We focus a lot on these employment visas that work to displace skilled American workers, like the H-1B visa. And we were looking at the semiconductor industry. We found that there was a big hole in the research. And we knew that companies like Intel were using the H-1B visa program to displace American engineers. And so we were able to get funded a lot of research in that area. And that policy piece is really helping us now on Capitol Hill as we educate lawmakers and their staffs on how these employment visas, as well as the offshoring of our manufacturing, is crushing America's innovation and productivity. So that's how you can use policy. You can do all kinds of research locally. Here in Lehigh County, there's so many gaps in knowledge, but the information is all out there. You can go to voter rolls, get data. You can look at transcripts of commissioner meetings. There's so much information out there. You can go and talk to people. Like, I live in the city of Lancaster, and it's amazing. You sit down with the director of public works, you learn so much of what's going on in the city. It's great. So that's the kind of research that you could be doing at the grassroots level to help you create the policy pieces and the data that you need to be effective as activists and organizers. Oh, and that's, we actually wrote a bill for H-1B visa reform about 5 years ago. So those are things you can do too. And I would always, if you can, you know, start trying your hands at writing legislation. You learn a lot, and you can work with different legislative aides, people who've been in politics, but you'll learn a lot if you start crafting your own legislation. Activism. This is a big deal. As you know, Bill, Dave, when you guys are organizing a group, it's nonstop. You know, will you make it to the meeting? You call them again. Are you going to be there tomorrow? Yeah. You're going to be there tonight? Yeah, that's what you do. And it's, you know, during an election, it's a lot easier to organize because people are a little more, they're more interested. You've got a very finite goal, getting a person elected. But after that, what do you do? Well, you have to, again, that's where your mission statement comes in, that's where the shared values, and everyone has a shared vision on what you need to do and get done. My activism eventually led me to the White House on August 3rd, 2020. I got to sit with the President of the United States. He signed an executive order I helped write, and we saved 200 Tennessee Valley Authority union jobs that day because they were about to be offshored to H-1B visa consulting firms. So that's what activism can do. So when you're hotly engaged, like Bill, you're always engaged. I mean, you know more about what's going on in the alt media crowd than I do. You will find opportunities to make a difference. That's, you know, when I saw an article what was going on in Tennessee Valley Authority, that was our in, and that got us into the White House. But, you know, that's me protesting outside, actually counter-protesting outside the White House. So never forget your activist roots. Activists are the life's blood of any organization. It's what keeps it from being a think tank. There's a lot of NGOs. There's probably no bigger critic of non-government organizations, foundations, nonprofits than I am. I think most have long outlived their usefulness. They might start with a great idea, but they become little bureaucracies. People are looking, wow, you know, if I do this for another 20 years, I can retire in this job, when the goals really should be to wind this down. I forget his name, but he was one of the people that was the founder of Sears and Roebuck, and he had a nonprofit. And when in his will, he said, this is the deal. In 36 years, you will close your doors. You will have spent all the money down on the mission. And that's that. And I think that's pretty cool. I think that's probably the way nonprofits should be run, or that should be their goal. Otherwise, they go on 45, 50, 100 years without actually accomplishing their goals. And you can do fun things. I mean, here we are. Let me see if I can get these to play. There we go. There's... I think I'm able to do that. Oh, those, the amazing thing now is with social media and digital arts, you can, your reach is only, it's only constrained by your vision of what you want to do. And that's another thing where activists really come in, because you'd be amazed at the talent that you can find within your organization. You know, people come to you as like, oh, what do you want me to do? Well, what can you do and what do you want to do? Oh, I do video. Oh, great, we've got jobs for you. And with the social media again, YouTube, X, there's great ways to really get out and reach the public and build your organization. Excellent. Okay. I would recommend what I call the inside-outside strategy. I didn't come up with this notion. It was actually Howard Dean's notion. He ran for president in 2004. After he failed to be elected president, he wanted to be head of the Democratic National Committee.
Right.
Yeah. And they said, no, you're not going to be head of the DNC. So people that supported him and people that supported Dennis Kucinich, we all met at the same time, but in different places across the country. And the message was very clear. Either Howard Dean becomes head of the DNC, or all the, we will call progressives at the time. I have no idea what a progressive is today. It's very different than it was in 2004. But we said we would walk from the party. And Howard Dean became head of the DNC. He hired 2 people for every state to help organize. And he executed what he called the inside-outside strategy. The inside strategy was to change the administration of the Democratic Party, start to push out the blue dog Democrats, propose legislation and policies that were more in line with working people and women, non-interventionalists, like get us out of Iraq, single-payer health care. But the outside strategy was, all right, we've got people in every jurisdiction, get to work. Where I was living at the time in Southern California, there were 2 women who were organizing in the county of Riverside, which is east of Los Angeles County. And they had gotten an old voter roll and they started knocking on doors. And they'd gone down a block and this woman comes running. She's like, stop, stop, stop. You're the Democrats. I've never seen a Democrat here in years. And as a result of this kind of organizing, and it doesn't matter, look, political party affiliations be damned. What matters is the work that you're doing. Look, the moral majority, a lot of what they learned, what they had gotten from Sal Lewinsky's Rules for Radicals, and they simply followed what he was doing. It's just these are just certain organizing principles that, regardless of political party, will work. And as a result of Howard Dean's inside-outside strategy, they retook the House in 2006. Pelosi became Speaker of the House, and what became very apparent to me was we were too successful too fast. The Democratic Party needed at least another 4 years on its knees to shake out all the bad mojo that was in it, but it didn't happen. And people like me, we were all kind of ostracized and pushed out. That was that. But pretty damn effective organizing. It worked. So with President Trump, we have an amazing opportunity now in this administration, unlike the first administration, where he really didn't know what he was doing when he hit DC. He didn't understand the swamp. So he was going off of recommendations on who to appoint to various positions and policy pieces. Very different world right now. There are America First people now matriculating into every level of the federal bureaucracy. And so we have friends on the inside, so we can effectively run that inside strategy. There are electeds like Riley Moore out of West Virginia who are America First candidates that are sympathetic to the things we want to accomplish. So that would be the inside and the outside, getting back to people like Scott Pressler, who was nonstop running around Pennsylvania organizing. I ran into him 3 times, and every time I'd run in, he goes, "Are you registered to vote?" I'm like, yeah, I'm not here, you would think so, but we need that. That's that energy that's out there, getting people registered, getting people to run for office. They run for office, they fail, get them to run again. Everything that they've learned. And that's the outside strategy. So we can, I think, be very effective if we as whether we're closely affiliated or loosely affiliated, pursue that. And here in Pennsylvania, so much work to do in Harrisburg. And you know, it all starts with conversations with our electeds and their staff. Okay, litigation. As I said earlier, sometimes you got to drag them to the courthouse door. We are currently have 36 lawsuits that we're running right now against companies that have discriminated against Americans in favor of H-1B workers. And not only that, we're teaching our tech workers who've been laid off, furloughed, or still working even, how to spot, you know, discrimination and how to fight back against it. Complain to where to complain in the Department of Labor or Department of Justice. And getting back to the inside-outside strategy again, a letter just came out of Department of Homeland Security and ultimately then down to the Department of Justice saying they're going to be taking a very close look at all of these complaints that are coming up from Americans that are being pushed aside in favor of H-1B visa holders or STEM OPT holders. And I've seen this firsthand. We had one activist who saw this ad that was, you know, looking for only H-1B visa workers, which is discrimination. It's called country of origin discrimination. He filed a complaint with Department of Labor, the IER section. They called him. They did a Zoom. He takes them on LinkedIn, where there's 6 other companies doing the same thing. And the guy's like, I'm going after all 6 of them. And then they're like, we're going to stick another lawyer on this. So this is great. We have friendlies. We have a president in office who's really setting a tone. And that's America first. So litigation, if you can do it, it's awesome. But let's talk about how to go about it. Because one thing small organizations can do, and Bill has experience with this, which is awesome. You don't run into people that understand not only what a pro se lawsuit is, but have actually done them. So pro se is basically you represent yourself. You don't have an attorney. Someone who's teaching us how to do this is a fellow by the name of Richard Maximus Strahan. He's the New York Times said he was the most arrested man in Massachusetts state history, and he'll always say, but with the least amount of convictions. He was a real fighter for the right whale, and he's teaching us how to do pro se lawsuits. It's a very different worldview, and some of the benefits are, you know, there's cost savings. You don't have to. It's only filing fees. You have direct control over your case. You don't have a third party saying, well, I really wouldn't go there. You know, let's play it this way. Or this is how I would write the brief. You can move faster. And also, judges are compelled to help you in the court, where they're not compelled to help your attorney. You know, in terms of if you don't understand things, explaining things to you. If you do something wrong, saying, okay, come back, you know, this is how you do it correctly, come back and refile. It's also an amazing learning opportunity to understand the legal system firsthand. Self-advocacy, yeah, some real pluses to it. And of course, the downside to it, as you could imagine, you don't have the legal expertise. It's amazing. You look at these briefs and in a lawsuit, and they're kind of mind-numbing, the legalese. But yeah, there's a number of weaknesses in there. Like they say, higher risk of making critical procedural errors that could dismiss your case, sure. But again, the courts do have to help you out. Limited ability to evaluate the strength of your case objectively. That's always a big deal, to sue or not to sue. And no access to an attorney's professional network, and several other things to look at when considering whether to be your pro se attorney or not. To NGO or not to NGO, again, as I was saying earlier, I love this quote from Elon Musk. The nature of the NGO scam is to have a cause that sounds philanthropic, like Save the Orphans of Sadville, and then they pocket the money and 0 orphans are actually helped. So, as your organization grows and you amass more people, you might decide to, become a 501c3 or 501c4, a PAC even, and then it's a matter of making sure that you're out there accomplishing your mission every day. My organization, I really thought with a second Trump term in 2020, I would be able to shut my doors in a year. And we were all happy about it. It was because we would have, I mean, you look, there were rule changes, administrative rule changes that were made during the last 6 months of his administration that would have effectively defanged the H-1B visa program. There were a couple other things that were going to be done, like the executive order he signed that day was going to build a firewall around the federal government for tech workers. They're going to get rid of all these H-1B visa dependent consulting firms. I really thought we were going to shut doors within a year, but he didn't get reelected. So here I am, slogging it out still. But we'll get there. I absolutely know we'll get there. And my last slide is this. I call it Kevin's order of battle. So activists, again, the lifeblood. And the concept of this came from back in the 1980s. I was working casual duty at Fort Huachuca, and they were assembling the Army's first anti-terrorism manual. Because we were hunting people like Abuni Dal, Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine General Command. And then sometimes we brush up against some original Irish Republican Army. And the major who was putting this together, one of the people who was doing a lot of the historical work, said, look, when you look at an effective terrorist cell, they have 3 things in common. They have one thing in common. They have 3 very distinct and different personalities. You have your ideologues, and they kind of keep the group on track. You have your criminals, because, well, you need them, because they'll teach you how to launder money, steal cars. Like, why would you rent a van if you're going to blow up a building? Going back to Oklahoma City, remember that? Mm-hmm. No criminals. And you need your crazies, because someone has to put the bomb up into the wheel well of the car and arm the mercury switch. And that's always a little dicey. Going back, kind of taking that knowledge and applying it to activism in the field. You still need your ideologues, crazies. I mean, I'm one. I'll stand outside in the rain with a sign, in front of a congressman's office, or and then opportunists. You're going to find opportunists out there. Some people, it's like. If you either read the book or saw the movie Charlotte's Web, Templeton the Rat, what did they do? They cut him a deal. Come to the state fair, and because they needed him, and he had to get what he wanted, and they got what they wanted. And when you're out there doing your activist thing, you're going to find there are people that they're sympathetic to the cause, but there's something they want. Maybe they want to run for office someday. It's like, okay, you help us get our guy in office. We're going to help you get your guy in office if you're the right kind. If you're the kind of person we want, or you want. Again, you have to just work those deals out. Don't be shy about it. And that's really about it from an organizing standpoint, guys. Any questions?
I have a question.
Sure, Bill.
Okay. We'll look at real radical liberal, okay? I'd rather come to DNC chair What made you switch?
Oh, what made me switch?
Yeah.
A lot of my views didn't change. What happened was the progressive movement, which was really, when you looked at it in the beginning, it was Howard Dean and Dennis Kucinich. Interesting enough, I ran into Dennis Kucinich at CPAC. Again, him and his wife Elizabeth.
Well, he's there now.
Yeah, exactly. Dennis Kucinich founded Progressive Devs of America. He's at CPAC, hanging out with Steve Bannon.
All right.
So what had happened was the Democratic Party left us. And you can see what happened. You look at the election results of 2024. It is the exact inverse of the election results of 1980. The working class counties all went for Trump. The wealthy counties all went for the Democratic Party. It's the dynamics have really changed. The Democratic Party stopped being the party of the working man and women. I remember I was at an executive board event, and I was speaking, and I said, look, you know, in all deference to my gay, lesbian, you know, bi friends and whatnot, what is a white heterosexual male doing in the Democratic Party? You gotta wonder. And I said, look, for one reason, you know, on my father's side, my great-grandfather came from Lithuania, worked at coal mines up in Hazleton, eventually died of black lung. My grandfather was a drunk and who would leave the family, ride the rails. I mean, if not for things like the Works Progress Administration, that my family tree probably would have been wiped out. I mean, we were saved by the safety net at the end of the day. So I'm for the party of the working man and woman. And so when the party of the working man and woman has shifted to another party, I'm there. And also my stand on immigration was a big deal. I was pretty much ostracized for wanting to restrict immigration from the Democratic Party. In fact, I had people tell me, I'd have you drummed out of this party if I could. You can't. So, but my time was short for it, I knew that. So that's why I left.
I'm going to ask you that, okay, because I switched in 80, okay?
What's that?
I switched in 80 and went to Reagan.
Okay, yeah.
And, it's something really simplistic to me, okay? You mentioned something else about that woman, you know, the people going into that district.
Right.
Okay? And when I went into Philadelphia this year, okay, Joe was down there with me, they're looking, we've never seen a Republican here before.
Right.
And I figure Philadelphia's ready to flip. If we get enough boots on the ground, we can also do the same thing in Allentown. In these communities, they're ready to flip. They want a party that speaks for them.
Right.
They want to make change. They want to be part. People really want to work. But the problem is, when you're talking about these visas and stuff, they're taking our jobs.
They absolutely are. And it used to be, you know, they would say, oh, well, it's the gardener, you know, it's the, you know, and then eventually that became, it's just construction, you know. Construction, those were good middle-class jobs. Mm-hmm. And my first video that I did on the topic of immigration was probably back in 2009, 2010. It was an interview with this guy, Roman. I call it Roman the Tile Setter. So he's living up in the Pasadena area, and he started, like he said, sweeping floors, digging ditches. Then he starts getting into, eventually becomes, you know, an apprentice, journeyman, professional tile setter, has his own business, and he can't make ends meet in Pasadena. And he goes, he's trying to find work with these, you know, like Home Depot-ish type companies, like, you know, make me your preferred vendor. And he goes, no, you're way too expensive. He goes, come on, no, I'll bid the job fairly. And he said, tell you what, I'm going to send you to 3 places where our guy has just been, and you can do the work. And their guy was an illegal alien. Like he was there illegally. He didn't have to pay all the licensing and the insurance, pay his people at working age. Roman had was married, had a child with special needs. So he goes in, he prices a job, and at the time he said it's 20 grand, you know, do your bathroom. And the woman was like, oh no, so-and-so, he'd do it for 13. You cannot do this work for 13. I'm sorry, you cannot do this work. But that's just, so construction just got taken over and wages dropped. Again, you know, there's only it's not so bad in Pennsylvania as it is in California, where you simply don't work unless you're Mexican. That's just the way it goes. And the sad thing is, these are jobs Americans need to be doing, should be doing, but we've been acculturated to think, oh, that's a job. Yeah, I'm going to go to college. I'm not going to get my hands dirty, which is really a really bad track. So, yeah. And then skilled, H-1B visas, you know, companies like Disney, Northeast Utilities, SoCal Edison, Abbott Labs, Vanguard, just north of Philadelphia, CSX. They've all outsourced their IT, and now their back office and accounting. So all these white-collar professional jobs are being, one, outsourced to these H-1B visa-dependent companies like Tata Consultancy Services, Cognizant, who just lost a big lawsuit in California, Infosys. And what happens then is they'll do the knowledge transfer with the American. Okay? For 6 months, if you want to get your severance pay, you train this replacement. And that replacement, after they're trained, they're doing their job, they're supported, every H-1B worker in America is supported by 3 workers in India, and they're all doing the knowledge transfer. So eventually those jobs are offshore, never to come back to the US. So when they told you to learn to code, they were basically saying you're going to a dead end at this point. So that's something we have to get back. We're fighting with the administration on right now. Yes?
I don't know if you saw the press conference at the cabinet meeting today.
I missed it.
And Trump wants to sell these gold cards for $8 million. And he expects to get 1 million people sell 1 million cards and pay off the national debt with it. That would make it $5 trillion, you know?
Well, one, he can't. That has to get legislated. So that will run afoul of the courts, I'm sure. But 2, we have a program, it's called the EB5 Investor Program. So for $800,000 or $1 million, you can invest in a company here in the U.S. and get a visa to work here in the U.S. Not a green card, not a pathway to citizenship per se, but you can be here on an employment document. The problem is it's really abused. I mean, there's all kinds of fraud and schemes. A lot of them are real estate schemes, which really don't add to long-term jobs. So, you know, maybe sometimes with Trump, he throws something out there to gauge the reaction. It's a balloon. It's a trial balloon, and it's also, there might be a deal behind it, because maybe he's like, well, okay, give me that. I want, you know, I'll take, you give me this, I'll give you that. We don't, so sometimes it's, there's a shell game going on, because he does tend to work at a different level. But yeah, it's, to me, on his face, it's just silly. It's not going to help us.
It seems like Trump's, like his tariffs and everything, he's not using them in the traditional sense. He's trying to raise money so that he can pay for some of these other programs and so forth, like Dodge and whatever. And then, of course, you know, if we keep raising the debt limit and everything, we're already up to $37 trillion.
I love what Scott Pressler said about it. He said, we don't have a taxing problem, we have a spending problem in this country. And we got to get that, I mean, defense has to really get gutted. It's just, we spend too much money, it's killing us. We have to stop offshoring, but I think, and both, you know, Navarro is back in the administration. Lighthizer, who was U.S. Trade Rep in the first administration, is not back in the administration, but his acolyte Jameson is U.S. Trade Rep. And I feel the strategy with the tariffs, they're not really so much looking to make money off it, but force businesses back. I just did a Substack today on Apple. They announced they're going to do a $500 billion investment here in the US, which, if they're not lying this time, because they outright lied 3 other times in the past, but it's happening early in the administration, and they're going to get hit with that 10% tariff on their iPhones like everyone else. So maybe there's enough incentive to start moving the things back. But let's face it, when I was a kid in 1980, when I graduated from high school, I didn't have to go in the Army 2 days later. There were plenty of manufacturing jobs. Like in Quakertown, you had Oleum Tile, Fason, just to name a few. Plenty of tool and die shops, all kinds of work to be found. You know, you could leave home, get an apartment, buy a truck, all of that stuff. And then you do that for a while, maybe you get on here with Bethlehem Steel. And that's where you get, you know, the 30 years and the gold watch. All of that's gone. All that's gone. Then they said, oh, the service economy. The problem with the service economy, the workers are just getting scraps off the table. And then we went offshore. That's really, I worked for Ross Perot for that reason, as a volunteer and then later as paid staff, because I knew this was going to harm the country in the long run. And Perot was pretty much right about everything, you know, at the end of the day. So, answer your question? Okay. Yes?
Quick comment and then a quick question. When you said about leaving the party, it always cracks me up because the Democrats keep screaming, we need our own version of Joe Rogan. Well, you had him. You don't know what his name was? His name was Joe Rogan.
You had him.
People screwed him over. But the question is, when you mentioned NGOs, obviously that name's been floated around a lot in the last few weeks. What exactly is an NGO? Like, what defines you as an NGO?
Well, the term, it's non-government organization, and they do a lot of work governments could be doing. They're just simply outside. They're not private. They're a non-profit. So you can look at their 990s that they file every year. Some are, I would say that they're wonderful organizations. They actually do help. But others, you look at the NGOs that are being financed by by George Soros's Open Society Foundation. That's a great example. I mean, these are really malicious, nefarious organizations. You know, and to tell you how they work, I'll give you a great story. So, you're all familiar with Black Lives Matter. Long before Jefferson, Missouri. Was it Jefferson? No, it wasn't Jefferson, Missouri. It was a town in Missouri.
Joplin.
I'm sorry?
Joplin?
Not Joplin. It's where they had that, the fellow was killed.
St. Louis, wasn't it?
It was outside St.
Yeah,
Louis.
right, it's a suburb of St. Louis.
Yeah. But before that, a friend of mine had invited me to a weekend workshop. A woman he knew had a watchdog group, a small nonprofit, which she wasn't making any money off of, but it was a workshop, they were a watchdog group for the LA County Sheriff. And I went to it, and the woman teaching the class was Patrice Cullors, and Patrice Cullors is one of the 3 founders of Black Lives Matter. And so, went to the workshop, not a lot of it after that, but she ends up being one of the founders of Black Lives Matter. And then in 2017, an outfit called DC Leaks, was it? I think it might have been that. They actually were a Russian GRU operation, but they had hacked into the Open Society Foundation and pulled down tens of thousands of emails. It was brilliant. We saw their operating budgets for 4 years. And there was a line item for Black Lives Matter for, I believe it was $735,000. And after that, they had them, because they'd given them the money. So anything they might have thought in terms of, you know, like the disparate views that the founders might have had, things they wanted to do, they all fell in the line after they started taking the money. because that 735,000 that was split 3 ways, then led to a lot more, millions of dollars coming in, and then they were completely owned and co-opted by George Soros. And you got to hand it to the guy. I mean, he's actually quite brilliant at finding these little diamonds in the rough and throwing cash at them. So, and I'm hoping that will come to an end, because we saw, you know, Silicon Valley Bank, that's now being operated by East Coast banks now. You know, all these guys are writing checks for millions of dollars to different causes and stuff. They're not doing that anymore. Sam Bankman-Fried rolled up and gone. Now we just got to, you know, roll up George Soros.
So what is the difference between
us and an NGO?
Not so much. I mean, anyone can create an NGO. They can.
So you create it like you would an LLC or a...
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay. So you have to create it, designate yourself.
Correct.
As one. Gotcha. That's what that was the one piece I kept missing. Okay, thank you.
Right.
What we're dealing with, like in Pennsylvania here, NGOs are up in Erie, they're signing up illegals to vote, they're signing illegals to get driver's licenses, okay? And then you got the Catholic Relief Organization, the Lutheran Relief Organization.
Oh, yeah.
They're getting funded through this outside funding. They're the ones that are helping the illegals disseminate into the country. And these are the things I think you might be referencing, these type of things there. He's given us 2 different opinions on NGOs, okay?
Yeah, they could be really good, or their Church World Services is a great example where in 2023, so Church World Services at that time, I think they brought in about $80 million in federal funding to relocate quote-unquote refugees to the United States. My city, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, because they got the American Relief Funds, you know, that came with the whole, you know, during the time of COVID and everything. It's like they got pushed down to the states, down to the counties, and down to the municipalities. What does my virtue signaling city council decide to do? Give $250,000 to Church World Services to relocate more poor people to the city of Lancaster, more refugees, quote unquote. I say quote unquote because what we call refugees are not refugees. When you look at who is designated a refugee by the United Nations High Commission on Refugees, simply being poor and destitute doesn't get it. You're a refugee because you need a lifeboat that day, or you're gonna die. And you go to the first country where you're safe, not like, oh, I gotta get to the US and, you know, say that I'm a refugee. You're not playing by the rules. And unfortunately, the Biden administration they did a number of administrative rule changes, like they gave temporary protective status to 300,000 Haitians, which 30,000 went to a small town in Indiana and overran it. It's insane. So that's how these NGOs like that operate. You know, they're a charity, and they got tax exempt status, but through the government, they've been able to funnel all those tax dollars.
So they get grants.
Yeah, grants, huge
grants.
Absolutely, and those grants have ballooned. Like you had mentioned, Catholic Charities. There's an amazing guy down the border in San Antonio area, Hernander Acer. He's just been following these guys and dogging Catholic Charities. I actually did a protest in front of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops a year ago. It's horrendous what they're doing. It is human trafficking, nothing less. And they're all, as we're finding out with Doge, they're all in cahoots.
So
yes.
free market capitalism is competing with social welfare programs in this case. And the social welfare programs are fragmented into almost every industry in society that the communists, the socialists, have conceived a web of destruction in our economy. How does free market capitalism compete with socialism in that effect? In that we have a symbol for freedom, and that's great. But they have an industry that goes into every major market and every small market that advocates for victims and such.
Capitalism, you almost have to define what capitalism is anymore. My organization, we push back against globalism and what I call neoliberalism. This is the uninhibited movement of people, capital, and goods across international borders for one purpose, and that is to maximize profit. And what they do is they beggar the countries like ours, where either we're buying these cheap goods and not manufacturing here anymore, or they're going and exploiting the lack of environmental regulations and other policies where they're able to make things really cheap, and they basically pull people off of their farms, put them into the squalor of these cities where they're manufacturing, they're, in China where they're working horrendous hours. That's not, to me, I don't think that was, when you looked at our founding fathers, what their view of capitalism was, because they didn't have a view. It was basically transactional. And even, Jefferson, who was opposed to tariffs, eventually came around to supporting tariffs because he saw that we needed to build up manufacturing here in the U.S. So, yeah, I hear you. Because we've been acculturized to the social safety nets. And the fact that, wow, if someone is unemployed, that's a great tragedy. Whereas I had mentioned, Jacob Coxey, at that time, the great moral hazard was for the government to get involved. Yes, there's going to be periods of prosperity, yes, there are going to be depressions, but as you're saying, and I think you're alluding to, there's a moral hazard with charity. I was reading Theodore Roosevelt's book, The Rough Riders, and at the end of it, when they brought the regiment up to New York to muster it out, the surgeon came to see him, and he said, Mr. Roosevelt, you have to talk to your troops. There's guys that have been wounded, and they're downplaying their wounds. They can get all financial, benefits, whether it's, medical or financial, but they're downplaying their wounds, so you need to have a talk to them. And then he also wrote about how the Knickerbocker Society, there were a number of Native Americans that were part of the Rough Riders, and they returned to their reservations. So the Knickerbocker Society raised this money and sent it out, only to get the money back with a note from the headmistress wrote, President Roosevelt, you wouldn't believe the hooping and hollering that went on here when we found out you were elected president, but no one feels good about accepting charity.
So tying into the NGO movement, and right now we have a lot of NGOs running these social programs through grant money. That was where I wanted to touch base here. What is the competitive perspective for Republicans and conservatives to counter this domination of NGO grant money and international organizations like CrowdStrike?
Yeah. Maybe the counter is, look, eventually the money's, what was it Margaret Thatcher said, eventually other people's money runs out. And we're seeing that now. We have not. I think a government should be responsive to pains that they're feeling and seeing in that district. And if it's being glazed over with a lot of money that is not actually in the long-term best interest of that local, state, or the national economy, I think we're cruising for a bruise as we are now. Like we've been able to paper over the offshoring. China produces 33% of the world's manufactured goods. And I think that's in actual goods, that's not probably in dollar, but they were on bicycles when Nixon went over there in 1972. And they knew exactly what they were doing, and they knew exactly, and their elites knew exactly what they were doing. And it's beggared us. Again, these, where was a lot of the social safety net was there in the corporation, where they gave you and your family medical and things like that. Now, you look at the average wage earner in America, they've been hammered almost out of existence. John Michael Greer wrote a piece in January 2016. He predicted Trump would be president. And he said, he's the only one speaking to class warfare. And he was talking about, when you look at the classes, you have your, what he calls the coupon clippers. These are people who are not like clipping coupons in the paper. They're living off of intergenerational wealth in the stock market and things like that. And then you have your salary. These are people that are making salaries with benefits like healthcare, healthcare, things like that, vacations, time off. And then you have your wage earners that don't have a lot of these benefits, are working for an hourly wage. And then you have those that are living off of government, they could be retired, they could be living on welfare, things like that. And it's the wage earner in this country that has absolutely got pummeled since the 1990s, almost out of existence. Their backs are against the wall. And why? Because the government has interfered on so many levels. Like Bill was saying, they bring in the cheap labor that pushes us out of jobs. They offshore the jobs, so it's like if you get a little uppity and you want more wages, because it's all supply and demand, whether it's labor or capital, well, we'll just push that down to Mexico. And we've been at a disadvantage. And I know what you're saying, and I probably don't have a good answer to it. I'll be upfront with you, because there's a complexity there, and maybe even there's a simplicity too. It's like, well, why should I work when the government's paying me not to work? Or, hey, I'm going to go work in this nonprofit that's getting these grants in, and they're coming in like clockwork. I mean, I see this in Lancaster because we're full of them. And why would I care about what's going on in the real economy, It's like, I wrote a piece on India a few weeks ago, and they bring in $200 billion a year, US dollar, in business process outsourcing, so offshoring those white collar jobs to India. They bring in another $120 billion in remittances from people from India working here in the United States. Yes, it's helping that regime stay stable, Modi's regime be stable, but it's not helping the deep economy. They're not building real value in that economy. I mean, when I was a kid, it was well known that 76% of every dollar in manufacturing went to labor, because that's the way it's been since the American Revolution. When you look at the service industry, that's probably 25%. The rest of it is kept by the owners themselves. It's a much, I wouldn't even call it democratic, but I mean, the pie is cut up not in the favor of people when we move from a manufacturing to a service economy. And don't even get me started on agriculture. I mean, Jesus Christ, that's how they learn these fucking efficiency models. In the 70s, you had Butts, who was Secretary of Agriculture, and he said, get big or get out. I mean, I watched family farms go under. Our neighbors, they said to me, the Landises, that, for 5 generations, there's been a Landis here, and there won't be a 6th. And this was an economic unit that supported.
This was all Monsanto, right?
It's, who's the other, the
Monsanto seed, the marketing of the Monsanto
well, Monsanto's
seed, right?
part of that, but AGM, the supermarket of the world or something. Get big or get out. use our agriculture as a weapon, kind of what we were weaponizing against the Russians at the time. We were just gonna, it was silly, and they didn't realize that, as Wendell Berry aptly said, it was agriculture. It supported a whole culture, a town, a way of life. And you look at manufacturing centers here in the States, that was a culture too. It was like, this is a company town. Hershey's a great, probably the poster child, something like that. I mean, capitalism was, worked because we had, in 1924, greatly restricted immigration. My mother came here in 1952. We only let out 178,000 green cards that year. There were no employment visa programs. Well, actually that year I think they started an employment visa program. But, labor was very much in demand. Companies invested in their employees. If downtimes, like up until 1995, if you were in the semiconductor industry and the economy tanked, they did everything they could to keep you. They would furlough you, not lay you off. They would take, reduced hours, things like that, haircuts across the board, because their workers were really valuable to them. So in that way, I see where capitalism works well. But in this globalized neoliberal world, it's not working. I don't know if it can work for the average working man.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't know, I probably didn't answer your question, but just my thoughts.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I have a question. The work you're doing to stop the H-1B visas and immigrants, the education system in this country is pretty terrible. And you have, whatever they call that new math that they're doing that's crippling children, and the reading is difficult, they're all failing. But overseas, they've never bought into the kind of educational perversions that we've done here.
Well, I'm going to push back. I'm going to tell you why. I love pushing back because there's a thing called PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment. And there's 74 countries in it. When you look at the U.S., the top, American Asian students rank just below Asian students in Singapore. And then you look at also the white demographic, who are just a few levels below that. So when you look at America by demographics, and then when you look at it as a whole, we're above the median in terms of where our students fall in terms of reading, math, and science. Now, we produce over 25, we produce an overabundance of STEM graduates from our universities. When you look at the jobs that require science, technology, engineering, and math degrees, we produce an overabundance. And they're highly skilled, and I know they're highly skilled because the National Science Foundation did a study in I think it was 2019. They looked at computer science majors at university. And the United States, when you took out the foreign students here in the US, were better than the Russians and the Chinese. I mean, Indians don't even come into this because when I mentioned the PISA results, so in, I believe it was 16 or 18, they participated, and they didn't participate again in 2022 because of the 74 countries, they were ranked 72. So we produce the skill. I mean, you're right, we have lousy college. I lived in Los Angeles for 20 years. LA Unified is a disaster, with the exception of a couple districts within it, or a couple schools within it. However, just bordering it, LA Unified, is La Cañada Flinders. They had, in 2023, 9 National Merit Scholar finalists. And then, that's a public school. Then you go to the private schools like Polytech in Pasadena, 33% of the school are national merit science finalists. Or even, I think they might even be full scholars, not just finalists. So we produce the talent. There's a reason foreigners come here. The problem is this, and that's the propaganda we're told. Because when Americans have to train their replacement, they're not training the best and the brightest. I mean, you wouldn't be training the best and the brightest. These people come here from, 75% of H-1B visa holders come from one country, and that's India. And there's a reason for that. They're absolutely desperate to get out of that country, and they will do anything they can, and they will lie, cheat, and steal to do it. I was talking to a woman who hired tech talent in California for the state, and she goes, Kev, I've seen the same resume for 3 different people. I mean, and so, and they'll all, and look, and they'll say, well, they come here and they go to really good universities, yeah, a tiny minority, maybe a few out of 1,000 go to like MIT and are doing really well. The vast majority are going to 3rd-tier schools for the sole purpose of getting a degree in STEM, and trust me, they're giving these degrees away, so that they can pick up a 3-year, what they call employment authorization document through a program called STEM, Optional Practical Training. And the employers love STEM OPT because it's practical training, so they can pay this person anything they want. And then, 2, they don't have to pay FICA or Social Security. So if you've just graduated from a degree from Stanford with computer science, and someone has a choice between hiring you or someone here on a STEM OPT, and they get to pay them anything they want, they will probably go with that STEM OPT student. So we're literally, again, we talked about what was happening with our lesser skilled jobs, because there's no such thing as an unskilled job. I don't care, I mean, this woman who's our waitress tonight, that's a skill, really. Is she doing computer science? No. But that all jobs take skill, and they take drive. And what we're getting, now we're seeing the rungs pulled out from, initially with the H-1B visa, from the mid-tier of these professional careers. Remember how we were told to code, everything would be fine? Well, no. They're pulling those rungs away. And with STEM OPT, they're taking the bottom rungs away. It's really tragic, and we're not going to be better for it as a country. Yes?
Just to clarify, when you say we perform above the median, are you talking about developed nations or all nations?
All nations. There were 74 in that particular, and I will send you the diagram that I use.
Okay, so where do we rate among quote developed nations, like the top 35?
Not bad. I don't recall what they are, but when you look at OECD countries, we rank pretty well.
Okay, so we're not in the 30s. That's not true.
I mean, we have schools that don't perform.
I mean,
well.
as a total.
As a total, yeah. I mean, we do pretty well as a total.
So, like I'm talking about, I guess, North Korea, or sorry, South Korea.
South Korea.
And
as a total, I mean, those countries have us, like Singapore, Hong Kong. Yeah, but I mean, when you look at Russia, when you look at other countries, and America is a big country. I mean, if you look at sectors of America, they do really, really well. And so that has to be taken into account.
okay, and then one other qualification, you had said if you take out the foreign students, even if you
Right,
take out the foreign students,
this was an NSF
are
study.
we talking about like Indian American children, or are we talking about?
No, we're
like,
talking
people
about
who are-
foreign. So when I said that, so that was a study done of computer science students in college, and they rated, and Americans came out on top above China and Russia and India. And that's when we took out those foreign students studying here in the United States. So it's not like, oh, you guys did really good because you have all these foreign students studying your colleges. No, when you took those students out, we did.
So, but not the ethnicity of them, just the ones that are physically
Right.
not citizens, or
Correct.
okay.
Physically, yeah.
Because
not
when
citizens.
I go to the school board meetings, things like that,
they announce that they present the academic awards. I'd say out of a school district of almost 10,000 students, I'd say 90+% either are Indian or Asian, have Indian or Asian descent. So that's what I'm talking about. Like if you took them out.
College level.
College
We're
level.
not talking about our high school level.
Oh, okay, you're strictly talking.
Right, at college, that's what I'm
Secondary.
saying, yes.
Or-
Yeah,
okay,
tertiary
oh,
education,
okay.
yes.
I'm
That's
talking
what
about
about, yes.
K through 12 level.
And it's interesting, when I was in Korea, my interpreter translator, his son was studying at University of Chicago. And his son was studying math. And he said, you know, bachelor's degree was like shooting ducks in a barrel. But he said the master's degree was crushing him. Because he was in with Americans that loved math. And he wanted to go on for his PhD, but he wasn't sure he could make it. But the cool thing was he wanted to teach Americans math. So when you look at the higher skill levels, I mean, Americans just dominate. It is our education. It's a good education system. There's public, and don't forget, the private schools are pretty amazing here in the States. Pretty much all of them, compared to a lot of public schools. But there are public schools, like I mentioned, like in LA. We had LA Unified, where 33% don't graduate. That's starting at freshman to senior, and it's atrocious what's going on there. I did a career day once at LA Unified School. It didn't go well. But yeah, but when you have great ones too.
I was gonna say, it seems to me you're saying we have, our inner city schools are failing greatly, but there's schools out there in the suburbs and everything, like he's talking about one of the better school districts, Parkland out here.
And we're producing.
And they're producing it, and there's certain ethnic groups, like the Jewish kids, the Jewish people always had a high level of, you know, being in the financial industry and all that back to the Middle Ages. And the Asians have always had an affinity to doing that.
Because, you know, again, there's, when you look at Asian and Indian families here in the U.S., it's the Asians, you go back to the, Confucian system, where they highly value education. So it's like, yes, you will, you know, you're going to study. When I was in LA, a friend of mine, she was Armenian, I would go over to her house, and you know, both sons each had a tutor. One had an art tutor, the other one had a math tutor. So it's values, but we do, it's a myth to say that we don't, as a country, produce enough STEM talent. We produce more than enough STEM talent. And
The STEM programs are great, okay? My wife's a STEM teacher.
yeah,
All right, she gets bitched at though because she's too hard. All right?
good for her.
And the parents want her just to give grades. She won't do that. And she's a presidential award winner. All right?
I mean, look, the best example I have for this, just how. So China drops deep speak on the world. AI, they literally leapfrog everything the rest of the world has been doing for the last decade. And they did it without any foreigners, because I said, where's their H-1B program? Zero. And one of the I believe she was the COO of the company, said, you know, we weren't the best. You know, none of us were like considered the best, but we worked well together. None of us studied outside of China. So, look, we have this, so we don't need, it's a myth to say that we need this talent. 1971, Intel built the 404, the world's first commercially viable semiconductor chip. We didn't need foreigners for that. I mean, I'm sure there was a foreigner here and there. And there's this myth too that, 53% of like Silicon Valley companies were founded by foreigners. That's a myth. It's closer to 11% because, you know, for instance, Sergey Brin at Google, that he was a foreigner, sure, but there were 4 other Americans that were there. So when you look at their actual participation, it's really closer to 11%. Like they say, Facebook was founded by foreigners. Well, no, they had one person from Brazil, and I got a feeling Mark Zuckerberg would have probably done just fine without him. So we've got the talent. We've just been gaslit to think that Americans are dumb. The same way we're told Americans, there's jobs Americans won't do, like dig ditches. I mean, I shoveled dog shit, horse shit when I was a kid, dug ditches for money. I love that kind of work. It paid me good, decent money. So we've just gaslit ourselves into thinking, well, but the thing, and the reality is, we won't do it for the wages being offered. I mean, at the end of the day. So
Thank you for coming.
What was that OPT standing
oh,
for?
optional practical training.
Thank you.
And then there's STEM optional practical training. That gets a 3-year work authorization. Regular OPT is 1 year. And then there's also curricular practical training, CPT, and that's while you're a student.
Those tests you just gave that acronym, sorry, Bill.
Oh,
Those tests.
PISA,
What is it called?
Program for International Student Assessment, PISA, P-I-S-A, Program
Oh.
for International Student
Thank you.
Assessment. So yeah, look at the results. In fact, I'll probably find, I think I have a graph or something.
Okay.